Yeah, thanks for joining us for another Manchester tech journey. So I'm Michael. I head up the tech recruitment team for IO Associates. One of the reasons I wanted to start this is to speak to technical leaders in and around Manchester and talk about their technical journey, and also something I'm really passionate about, the Manchester tech scene and the growth it's had over the years. So we've got Jake joining us today. Thank you very much for joining us, mate. I do, if you want to start off a bit of an intro.
Wow, sounds good. All right, so I'm Jake. I'm the engineering director over at Hyperact, which is a product engineering consultancy based in Manchester and Leeds. Have about 15 years experience in the engineering industry through a bunch of different roles, all the way from being an individual contributor all the way up to engineering leadership as I am today.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate. Well, so yeah, just to kick us off then, I was really keen to understand a bit around your current role, around Hyperact and what you guys are doing in Manchester. I know we spoke about it quite a bit, but it sounds like some really exciting things happening at the minute.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, Hyperact is around about 2 or 3 years old now. A little bit of a startup consultancy. I joined, I think, 4 months ago now, really to grow, seed, and build our engineering practice in Manchester and Leeds. We're kind of a full stack, full spectrum product consultancy. So we focus on everything from product strategy to service design, user design stuff, research, all the way through to build the engineering side as
So
well.
how are you finding being a startup in the challenging technical landscape at the minute then?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. I think first of all, we've got challenges in the way that engineering is done. Obviously, there's a lot of talk around AI and the productivity that you can get from that. Lots of organizations, lots of our clients obviously want to do more with less, and using AI there is kind of a productivity driver, which brings interesting challenges. Navigating that landscape, and of course puts a little bit of stress on kind of opportunities and what's out there, and making sure that lands right with clients when we're going after opportunities. But I think as well, I just think the sheer number of opportunities that are out there are kind of challenging and fragmented as well. Obviously, interest rates and the global turmoil that we're seeing at the minute is creating, I guess, a challenging market condition, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, and it's so I would consider IO, even though we've got a big company behind us, what we're doing at the minute in Manchester is that sort of like startup feel. And it is exciting, but it's said like I think you could obviously move quicker, make quicker decisions than working for those bigger companies. So I think what you guys are doing sort of really resonates with what we're doing as well as being that sort of Manchester based.
Agreed. I think it's really interesting because I think it puts more of an emphasis, doesn't it, on people and collaboration, and figuring out, what is the human way of delivering what we need to deliver. What do people actually need? There's a lot of AI slop out there, and I think if we focus instead on how can we enable organizations to deliver with more of a human touch, and whether that's through people or whether that's through figuring out what the actual problem is to solve, we can get to better outcomes.
Yeah, I think as you said, over the AI slop out there, a lot of companies are feeling it. I think the perception is that AI is trying to replace or not, but it's sort of saying trying to do more with less. But I still think that people element in consulting, whether that be sort of, technical consulting, recruitment consulting, any sort of like people to people industry, won't be lost anytime soon.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. It's really interesting, is it? Because when you're conversing with these AI tools, even things like deep research, right, with ChatGPT, it tries almost too hard to replace people and consultants. It just doesn't get just it's like an uncanny valley effect. It just doesn't quite get it right, and it feels out of place, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and I with regards to deep research, so shout out to James Welsh. So I had a conversation with him last week, and he sort of gave me a bit of a run through because it's not really something I've come across, but it's absolutely crazy. We've done a bit of a deep research into recruitment agencies in Manchester, and then it produced a podcast, yeah, sort of thing after. So it might even put this out of business already. So, but yeah, it is super interesting. There's so much you can do with it, but it's around, as you said, being able to know what's the best use for it, as opposed to just doing it for the sake of it. But yeah, straight into the conversation, we're already talking about AI. But moving in, I was really keen to understand around your sort of intro into tech and how you sort of found that initial place within the technical world.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess I want to say I took an unconventional approach into tech, but I don't think that's true these days. Actually, I'm kind of very much self-taught. So I've been coding for a very long time. That kind of started in high school. And I did go to college. I did HND in college. I think in systems and computer programming or something like that over at Wigan and Lee College, which was really interesting. Um, and in kind of the second or third year of that, I ended up getting a placement with a digital agency at the time. This must have been like 2010, 2011, something like that. Traditional agency stack, PHP, MySQL, LAMP at the time, which was interesting. And I kind of went to university, and I did around about 4 or 5 months on a computer science course, which was obviously a degree. And I dropped out after the fifth month to actually go and join the Department of Work and Pensions, which was really, I guess, my first role as a senior engineer at the time, actually, which was really interesting that the civil service at the time had very odd kind of job descriptions and levelings, but kind of joined as a senior engineer and spent a number of months actually pushing the DWP to cloud first adoption, actually. And that was about the time where things like GDS and user centric design was just spinning up. But I guess, yeah, I've been very much self taught, did go to college, but didn't necessarily get a computer science degree, and really has kind of built what I know and my experience through actually doing things and building.
Yeah. So did it start as a hobby initially, or was it? Because I appreciate some people are, and what I love so much about the tech industry is there isn't a linear path. Like obviously the perception is sometimes it's a hobby, computer science degree, junior dev, senior dev, lead dev, and then that to go from there. So
Yeah, definitely a hobby. I kind of vividly remember a friend of the family kind of gifting me this really old, I think it was like a Windows 3.1 machine. Can't remember the exact specs, but it was really old. It didn't have an internet card. It was completely disconnected from the web. And I remember sitting there and manually typing out HTML, right, to learn how to code. And I vividly remember those times, sat on my parents' living room floor and doing that and memorizing the syntax. And that was really how I got into it, right? And it just kind of went on from there.
and then yeah, and so your journey from starting in tech then, what was the progression to now being in that leadership role you are now? Because I always say this to everyone I speak to, if it's not for everyone. Some people, really good developers don't make good leaders, and really good leaders don't make good developers. And there are loads of different paths of being an individual contributor, being someone who's a domain expert. So how have you sort of progressed into a position now where you are a leader?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think it's kind of interesting. I think in a way it maybe is luck. Maybe luck doesn't exist. I don't know, but I've always found myself joining organizations at just the right time. So when I think back over my career, I've done stints in the civil service for maybe 3 different government bodies now, which have always focused on user centricity, right, putting the user at the heart of everything that we do. I think that's been fundamental, I guess, to my journey as a leader. I was very quick to realize in my career, I think maybe after 3, 4 years in, that actually the hardest part of building stuff is not the architecture, it's not the technology, it's not the programming language. Those things are hard, right? But actually, the hardest thing is people and the system that you're operating in to try and deliver the thing. And I think because I learned that so early on, I've been kind of quote unquote enlightened in a way to, I guess, help the folks that I've worked with and the organizations that I work with understand that if you focus on the people and the socio-technical aspect of delivering software, actually you're gonna be able to deliver things much faster, much higher quality and with better outcomes. And I think that shaped me over time. And I guess when I look at my career, I've gone from an individual contributor to technical architecture and strategy roles. So I've done that kind of architectural piece as well. And I guess I would still badge myself as an architect today. But I guess over the last 5 or 6 years, working really closely with people in predominantly leadership roles and helping to unblock them and help them see the path through to good delivery has really shaped me.
Yeah, amazing. Because I think sometimes it can be the best developer gets that leadership role, but there's some amazing coders out there who I know have been pushed into some leadership positions, but probably isn't right for them, isn't right for them. So I think and not for the business as well and the team. So it's about just being aware of that. I think, as you just touched on then, the people who can combine the commercial element, the people element, and the technical element, it's a very rare skill set. But it's always something I'd massively recommend to someone at midpoint in their career to go try and think about what your work does for the user or the customer.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think actually one of the things that you've seen over the years, I guess, particularly in the Manchester scene, but obviously more broader as well, is kind of this specialism of engineering role. We now have staff engineers, principal engineers, we have software engineering team leads, all with slightly different emphasis on what they focus in on and what they drill in on, which I think is great. Obviously, it gives engineering leaders, if you want to be completely code and architecture focused, you can go and do that. But if you want to be more people and system and delivery focused, then there's that route as well. I think that's been transformative, right, for the industry.
No, amazing. And then Is there anything you would have done differently throughout your career path? Because it sounds you touched on the end, so right time, right place. But I'm a massive believer if you make your own luck. But is there anything that you would have, say, looked back on and thought, "Do you know what, at this point in my career, I wish I'd done it a little bit differently"?
Yeah, I think maybe two things there. I think number one, for engineers or just folks out there looking to develop their careers, don't underestimate the value of having a network of folks. And that doesn't have to be like salesy or looking to land your next role, but talk to people, right, who are doing similar roles, or if not, more senior roles than you are, and understand what problems and challenges they face. Get a mentor, whether it's where you work or externally. And I guess I would have definitely, I think earlier in my career, found benefit from going and attending more meetups, right? Just getting out there and talking to people, because there's only so much you can take away from a podcast. There's only so much you can take away from, a conference keynote or something like that. I think you tend to miss this nuance of, well, doing it in the real world is far harder, right, than these keynote speakers might present at conferences. And then I think the second thing that I would maybe advocate for is, yeah, focusing in on that people side of delivering software. I think for the first 4 or 5 years, I did spend probably 100% of that time just being a good engineer, just coding, just learning all these different technologies. And I think it's probably a good amount of time spent, but maybe 100% was too much. Maybe I should have looked more at, what does agile software delivery actually mean? What problems is it solving? Because it's not just a Kanban board and a backlog. Actually, there's much more nuanced stuff being solved there. And I would kind of encourage junior engineers or folks just entering the industry to try and balance the time between those two.
Yeah, and on the first point again, massive advocate about it. You can just put yourself out your comfort zone, and speaking to people. And I know it's a very divisive subject at the minute around sort of remote work and in the office, but I definitely feel there's that value of being sat next to someone and it doesn't have to be 5 days a week, but like sat next to someone and going, I'm struggling with this, or have you thought about doing it this way? And having those conversations, because it just accelerates your learning, I feel, is working around good people. And I know there is technology to be able to enable that a little bit, but it is probably more transactional when you do it on Teams, I suppose.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting, actually, when I think back through my career. The most I've just been in the office is a phenomenal tool. I'm a huge advocate for remote working, but I think getting in a room with people is really valuable. And actually, when I think back to when have I grown the most, either as an individual contributor or as a leader, it's when I've pair programmed or when I've done ensemble programming, right, with a group of people. That there's nothing like sitting with another developer or a product owner or whatever it might be, with the same keyboard, the same screen, and solving problem together. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, and one of the things again we'll touch on in a minute is with Manchester, it is such a connected city, and there's so many people. And I'm not saying that other cities don't like or other places don't like it, but there's so many people out there willing to help and give their time and just have conversations with people about, like, I've been through this. This is how I've learned. This is what I recommend.
Actually, just on that, it's such a close-knit community of folks as well. The same names continuously pop up. And then there's a bit of an inside joke, I think, for folks in the Manchester tech scene, that it's a little bit like a roundabout, right? People move between the same companies, and it's true. It's a really small community.
Yeah. And have there been any particular challenges that have stood out to you over your time, and maybe during that transition from going and not being in a leadership role to actually when you first took up that first took up that mantle, I suppose?
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends on the type of organization that you're in, I think, first of all, and the types of challenges that you're going to face. There's some organizations out there that truly understand the benefit behind the people proposition, and that when we have a whole unit of delivery, that the whole team is responsible for the outcomes, then you get to a much better place than if you work for an organization that is really output focused. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I've ever come across is shifting and getting organizations to think more about outcomes than outputs. It's easy to be a feature factory, but it's hard to focus on to figure out what the right things are. That's definitely been a challenge. And I guess the other challenge as well that I continuously come up against, actually, in organizations that I work in, is the hiring process never seems to be efficient or effective. And no matter how you try to coach an organization to get that right, there's always resistance, no matter where you work. And I think that's really interesting. A lot of organizations are still really focused on the tech test, which is curious.
Yeah. And actually, I had an interesting conversation. So I was met up with a team of people I've just helped find built a team of 12 people, and we went for a few beers last week, and one of them asked me a question I'd never been asked before. Was like, who's more challenging during a recruitment process? Is it the employer or the employee? And I think I had to, took me back a little bit. I had to think about it. It's definitely the business, the majority of the time of like not having that recruitment process sick, because the majority of the time, the people, the candidate, as it's called, I don't know using that phrase, is looking for a job. They might be right, they might be wrong, but it's about enabling them to be able to show their best through that process, and also be honest with the time you've got. Like if you're working, recruitment isn't the be all and end all of the process. So like, was it not pictured, not sell, but like, see, working for an agency or even having someone internally to be able to get them through that process slickly, so they understand what the role entails, but also the benefits of working for the company. What a real look like, what a real look of what it'd be like to work there. And it can be done to get it done slick, but it's around all parties being engaged rather than one pushing or one pulling.
Agreed, agreed. Yeah, getting the people proposition right at the time of trying to hire folks is really important. In fact, it's probably more important than things like salary, right, and bonuses and that stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then, have you got any advice for someone looking to get? I know we touched on a couple of bits, but any like, what would you say your main key bit of advice be for someone to get into a similar position of yourself as engineering director of a really cool consultancy in Manchester?
I think that's really interesting. I guess first of all, try to get exposure to different types of projects and problems and stuff that you're trying to solve. I think for me, I've always been very broad. I've always felt a little bit T-shaped. I've never kind of pigeonholed myself into a single tech. I've always felt technology changes too quickly to be able to get success out of that, and so I've always been very broad. So my recommendation to folks is, look, don't have preconceived notions about technology. Come into things with an open mind. Be mindful of the pitfalls, but at the same time, try stuff, experiment with stuff, right? I think that's really important. And again, going back to what I said earlier, network with folks, figure out what other organizations are doing, right? And kind of take inspiration from that and factor it into your own growth journey. Talk to your boss about what progression paths are, but at the same time, challenge it as well. I think that's one of the challenges many folks get stuck into is a bit of a rut with their current employer and they have to tick these boxes. But I think you've also got to ask yourself, am I going to get the growth that I need? And maybe I need to look elsewhere for different opportunities.
And would you, on the first one, would you not say sometimes that being a specialist within one particular area is not going to be beneficial though? Because like, for example, if you're a .NET developer and then you're trying to jump to Java, and I appreciate there are similarities with certain object-oriented programming and stuff like that, but being a specialist in one rather than being broad, obviously I know it's work for yourself, but what do you say the pros and cons are? I suppose?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, maybe. I guess it depends on the type of person that you are individually. I'm someone who gets a lot of energy and kind of, I guess, delight in a way of working on different problems and challenges and learning new things. I think if you're more interested in predictable and steady and don't necessarily like change, then yeah, maybe you want to look into a single technology stack that's quite broad. And .NET's a good example of that, and Java's a good example of that. I guess my advice would be make sure that what you're picking has longevity. Make sure it's not going to disappear in the next 5 years. Otherwise, you might find yourself in a worse position than you started
Well,
in.
like Haskell and COBOL devs.
Exactly right. Yeah, there's not much opportunity for those folks. So yeah, pick wisely. But yeah, I mean, look, if you're into data, yeah, absolutely specialize in data science. Go and learn Python. That might be a real good door opener for you.
Nice. So moving on into Manchester then. So how long have you been in Manchester?
Born and raised. So my parents are from Lee, which is near Wigan, and currently live about 7 miles away from the city. So I've never left. Yeah.
Yeah, and what has it been like then? So someone who's born and raised in Manchester, what has it been like seeing the city grow, and what do you remember what it was when you first got into tech?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. I think the thing that stands out to me is there has been a real shift, I guess, in the technology scene in Manchester, but it's always had like a vibrant community around it. Thinking back 14, 15 years ago, I think it was predominantly agencies, marketing agencies, web agencies, building websites and that kind of good stuff. That was pretty much had the industry, I guess, at that point in Manchester. But over the last decade or so, we've seen some kind of huge institutions, but also really interesting startups kind of take home here or relocate here. And there's a couple of obvious ones. You've got the BBC in Media City that moved up from London. I mean, that was huge. We have Booking.com as another huge institution right over here, which has, I guess, also been instrumental in how the city has changed. Interestingly enough, both of those have had really fantastic kind of roots into tech as well. So they both have run apprenticeship programs, which is a fantastic way, right, for folks to get into tech, and graduate schemes and those kinds of really good stuff. Um, but yeah, we've got a lot of startups as well, right, which is really interesting, and a lot of investors are over here as well. We've got the likes of PKI in the AI space, which I think was recently acquired. Um, so yeah, it's changed. I think it's definitely become more diverse in terms of sector. We've got a lot of fintech. We've got a lot of travel and e-com here, which is great. We've got, I think, government agencies. GCHQ are here, I think, and obviously we've got the Department of Work and Pensions and the Home Office and probably others. So yeah, it's really interesting. It's grown from, I guess, being more of an agency type niche all the way up to having a lot of very, very large.
Was there any particular time that you saw like a real clear change, or has it just gradually happened? And was there like a turning point for you? Have you ever noticed?
That's interesting. I would almost say maybe 5 years plus, we saw a lot of big institutional names coming down here, right? I think that was definitely the start of it. But I think over the last 5 years, you've definitely seen more consultancies take home here, particularly startup ones. Obviously I'm working for one at the minute, but there's been a real insurgence of those guys. But yeah, more and more startups, right? More and more AI driven startups. I guess that's the change that I've seen. It's gone from institutional folks to a lot of homegrown startups here.
Yeah, and I think you find that when there's larger companies, you get smaller companies around. If you look at Silicon Valley, you get smaller companies around it to maybe that are spun off of the bigger companies, and then started their own thing up. And obviously, you have roots in a particular area, and want to sort of, well, obviously from a talent perspective as well, get some of the talent out of those bigger companies. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I guess with the likes of the big companies that have relocated, a lot of the talented staff relocated to Manchester as well, right? And that's brought a lot of good people to the city.
and then what do you feel makes the Manchester tech scene so special?
I have to say, I think it is really the close knit. I mean, I spoke about this a few times now, but it is the close knit community. I think if you go and speak to anybody in tech in Manchester, I think they could definitely point to 3 or 4 grassroots communities, right? That have either they used to exist or they still do exist and are thriving. I think about things like the Manchester Tech Festival. I think about things like Mad Lab. Those things come to mind, and there's even the Manchester Tech Slack community as well, right? That people are engaged in, and I think that springs to mind, like the inclusivity and the welcoming of that overall
Yeah,
community.
no, and I agree. So one of the first things I did when considering to move up to Manchester was went to the Manchester Tech Festival. But I love just being part of communities and being part of networks of people who want to add value to each other rather than sort of like take. And obviously, there's loads of different cities in that way. It might feel quite transactional, but Manchester's like we're all in it together.
Yeah, agreed, agreed.
And I personally don't feel that as much as so much has happened. Everyone I speak to has been here for so long. It feels like it's just getting started. It feels like now is the time to be here. So yes, good time.
Yeah, agreed.
And what do you feel Manchester does differently then to sort of other tech hubs in, for example, like London? London versus Manchester always gets talked about, but even ones as grandiose as like Silicon Valley or different ones in Europe. What do you feel Manchester different there?
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe this is a bit of a cop-out answer, and maybe I've already said it before, right? I think I don't know. Us Northerners, they bring something a little bit different to the table, I suppose, right? We're a super friendly bunch. I think most folks know people by name, and I guess that's what brings a slight different twist to the Manchester tech scene, right? We all know each other. There's a really close knit community there, and if you need that help, support, guidance, mentorship, it's there. I think I guess the other angle that I would bring to this as well is there's a lot of grassroots approaches into tech in and around Manchester. There's a lot of really interesting like startup boot camps that are
Yeah,
helping people get into tech.
North Coders.
North Coders, exactly. But a lot of the universities as well do a lot of community outreach. So think about the University of Salford. I know for a long time they've engaged with industry to figure out, well, what should we be teaching? What's the right route for these folks? And I guess it's that, isn't it? It's not just the organizations that are here, but it's also the educational industry as well, right? It's all really nice.
Yeah. And there's some really good universities, and there's you've got things like North Coders. I actually read an article the other day about Auto Trader and how they train the people from different backgrounds to, well, obviously they're a massive hirer and they're invested in sort of grassroots community, which we only encourage other businesses to do it. Wow. Okay. And then where do you where do you see it heading there, the current tech? You've seen all of the change. You've seen 5 years ago, these big institutions move up. Where do you see Manchester tech's ecosystem going then over the next, say, 5 years?
Yeah, I guess I don't see it stopping. We're continuing to see loads and loads of development and investment, I guess, into Manchester as a tech hub. And I think that's kind of really interesting that the government continues to talk about how, the UK has $1 trillion tech sector already, which is fantastic. And I think Manchester will continue being at the heart of that. I think we're probably going to see more and more startups, more and more scale-ups coming and emerging from Manchester. And, you know, I think AI definitely has a part to play in that as well. We've got a lot of AI organizations, that are here, and a lot of organizations investing into AI here as well. I'd like to see more of the data science and data engineering community grow as fast and at scale as, I guess, the software engineering community has here, which I think it is doing. But yeah, I guess almost even more scale and growth, but hopefully more diversity as well in terms of the industries and sectors we have.
Yeah, as you mentioned, you can already see that. I think as more confidence comes within the tech scene, the tech world, then you will see the more startup scale-ups emerge. And I think Manchester is the place to be in the sense of if you're not going to pick London. I know there's some really good hubs, and obviously I'm from Bristol myself, so I'm quite passionate about that. But I don't think I've seen anything as connected as Manchester. And then, from a solely tech perspective, then what's your tech prediction for sort of the next 12 months?
Ooh, interesting. Maybe this is a cop-out answer as well. I'm not sure. I think there'll be more of a resurgence around best practice software engineering. I think organizations will get their fill of AI and how AI can increase productivity. It can increase outputs, but I think there'll be a bit more of a focus on actually, well, what are we trying to build in the first place, and who are we building it for, and what actual problems is it trying to solve? And I think a lot of organizations are going full in on AI right now, but I think we'll start to see that investment paring back. And I think, it's great. Engineers should absolutely learn how to use AI in their workflow, but I don't think they should put all their eggs in that basket. And actually, I saw a news article, I think it might have been in Forbes recently, where I think Klarna, said a couple of maybe it was over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, that they were going to be AI first, and they were no longer going to hire folks, I think, in their call centers and help desks. And actually, I think what they've realized is, as they've embarked on that strategy, is quality goes down. Sure, you get more productivity or more output, but quality goes down overall. And I think we'll see a bit more of a resurgence around that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's a lot of people out there trying to adopt AI without actually realizing what it means for them as a business and what it means for the customer. And then there will be a sort of maybe a slight dip back into like people first, and to be able to sort of steer that ship. But obviously AI is not going anywhere. But I think there's still a lot to learn, and I think it won't be as widely adopted so quickly as some people predict.
Yeah.
Because some people are going all in on it, and
Yeah.
don't know why.
Yeah, and getting burnt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Priscilla, I think that's it for me. Really interesting chat. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much, mate.
No worries. Happy days. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.